Input gain is one of the most talked about subjects all over the internet right now. And with good reason, because I feel like it plays a very key factor in getting your tone right. And although I know that a lot of people make it seem a lot more complicated than it really is, and today, my friend, I'm gonna remove the veil of confusion around this subject by making it super easy and approachable for you to understand in what is gonna seem like
no time at all.
Amor lanza sing now. We break it down, baby. I get so many comments about this subject, and some people are just like asking me questions. Some other people are telling me, oh man, I figured out this thing by watching your videos. But I feel like I've never done it like in a way that is like way more approachable. Because I feel like the big problem within this whole subject is that we're talking about audio engineering.
We're not talking about guitar playing.
And of course, that makes it really hard because the end user of these plugins is actually guitar players, right? And that's why in a bunch of my videos, I've been saying that I feel like Ampsims are more like for audio engineers and music producers than actually for guitar players. Because there's a few terminologies and concepts that you really need to know to actually use these plugins in the right way, and input gain
is one of them.
I feel like some people, when they talk about this subject, I don't know, maybe sometimes it feels like they're being a little bit derogatory to the person watching the video just because somebody doesn't have the pre-knowledge that you have maybe. And I don't like that. And that's why I try to make my videos like super approachable so that you and I can understand this, because there's no reason to make things hard for anybody. The main problem then becomes that if we're talking about input gain, the single most important element of all of this, it seems like it's not the same for anybody. Because for example, the system that I'm running and the gear that I'm running is not the same that you're running, and our friend from Germany is not running the same. So how do you make a unified way to explain this subject that
everybody can use
universally and they can stop ruining their tone and blaming it on the gear? I didn't mean to come aggressive like that,
but
the fact is that this is a very important subject, and I want to make sure that everybody gets access to it. So after a few videos that I've been doing, I've been starting to come on with this notion that all these plugins have like the same metering. And I'm not talking about the way that they're using to calibrate their input gains, like for example, Neural DSP versus Amplitude.
That's not what I'm saying.
But all these people are working within certain kind of like margin of error that you should be working into to use their plugins in the best way. And that's why I go back to
input gain.
If we go right here to Amplitude, for example, you see this input meter. And whenever there's signal, you see it jumping around. And that is basically just telling you how loud things are coming into Amplitude. And why is that so important and key, where it seems like it's just something like very whatever? It's because that's the unified thing
that we can all see
and keep us a reference in our minds how some other people are using these plugins and feeling that they are actually getting the tones that they want. Because I know that a lot of people are complaining and they say, oh, Ampsims suck. But you have to realize that there's a lot of people that are saying Ampsims are amazing. So what is the problem, my friend? Let's find out right now. I'm going to start this video with my Fender American Professional 2 Stratocaster, because I feel like most people in the world maybe have a Strat of some sorts, and I feel like the pickups are very similar. And even if you're using a guitar that has humbuckers and does split, you can use this as a reference too. But don't worry, my friend, because I'm going to bring a bunch of guitars so we can check out how every single guitar impacts your tone and how you can make sure that with every single guitar that you have, you're not getting the same sound. Because I've heard a lot of people on the internet saying, oh, when your sound is distorted, you don't hear a difference. And that is not the way I see things. I feel like if things are not sounding different when they are different, maybe you're doing something wrong. Ooh, don't mean to throw shade right now, but I think I'm going to be doing a video about that subject too. Back to what we're doing.
Let's check input gain.
So with this Strat and almost any other Strat that has like similar pickups as this one, this is what you should be seeing if you're using Amplitude and you're watching your input gain. When I'm like totally bashing my guitar in this G chord on my bridge pickup, which I would never do, that's how hot my gain gets. But if I play normal as I would, that's what happens in your input meter. So when you're playing and you plug into your Amplitude with like a Strat sounding guitar, with that kind of pickups as hot as these are, that's what you should be looking at. And of course, if you have a Strat that you know, let's say that has like maybe, I don't know, 4.7 or 5.9 in their pickups, then you know that you should be getting a little bit less than I am getting, right? But what happens if I get a guitar with like PAF sounding pickups at maybe like 8K or 9K in range and try to do the same experiment? Let's check it out. So for that, my friend, I'm bringing my PRS SE Custom 2408 because the pickups that I have right here are the 8515s from the American guitars, and they are rated like at 8K, 9K. So I feel like this is great. Let's check the hot pickup, which is the bridge. If I am bashing it in the humbucker position, you are right at the edge of breaking. But this is like literally,
You will never play like this.
like if you're like playing riffs or something like, that's kind of what it should look like for you too. And then let's say if I split the pickups here, it looks a lot more like the Strat did, right? If you're just vibing, that's kind of what it should look like. So I feel like already we kind of know, okay, you should be like in amplitude anywhere from like halfway here to like all the way to the top. And that is before you touch anything here in amplitude. Like my input gain is on 0, as yours is.
Or it should be.
I think. Because I feel like you should be getting your gain around that place from your preamp or your interface. Because even though I'm right there at the edge, at the very top when I use my humbucker pickups, so what that means is that you are supposed to be getting your preamps or your interfaces or whatever it is that you're using, your console, your compressor, whatever it's coming before amplitude, meaning your converters. Let's say if you were to have like a Focusrite 212, that knob, if you have it on 0, and this is what you're looking in your input, that's where it should stay. Make sure that you're not getting red in that preamp because it usually is not going to sound good before it even hits amplitude. And then remember that when you have an amp here, the amp is going to expect certain kind of gain. And when I'm telling you to stay within these parameters in those specific guitar pickups, let's remember, single coils a little bit over this thing when you're bashing it. But when you're playing, it should be hovering around this all the time. But when you're using a humbucker equipped guitar, I feel like you have a little bit more leeway and you can maybe get all the way here. In the case that you only have humbucker equipped guitars, I would side with the side of caution and either lower your preamps a little bit more so that you're getting something that looks maybe like this. This would be like my normal level that we've been using till now. Almost like my mouse was like a limiter there telling you that's where it should stop. But if I only had humbucker equipped guitars, I would do something like this. And why do I make that distinction between humbuckers and single coils? Because some of you are going to have an extensive guitar collection and you most likely are going to have single coil pickup equipped guitars and humbucker equipped guitars. And some of you only have humbuckers. If you only have humbucker equipped guitars, this should be your maximum level. Before you hit amplitude. And if you have a single coil equipped guitar, that's what you should be looking at when you're
Bashing your guitar.
So let's say if you were to have like an, I don't know, maybe like an old vintage Gretsch and you don't have enough output, don't be afraid to crank your preamps a little bit so that you're getting a level that is at least kind of like this. And I say this specific place, like, I don't know, somewhere between 50% and 70%. Because I feel like that's the sweet spot in amplitude. Like as soon as you put a compressor or you put like an overdrive or you put a distortion or you put whatever you put in your signal chain, what you're going to be getting is what you would be expecting. So the reason why I like to be on the edge, and when I'm in humbucker mode, I see this. It's because I want to hear that difference when I use a single coil equipped guitar versus when I put some humbuckers on. Just like I was in the 50s or in the 60s, you know what I mean? Like you plug into your amp with a Strat and you're more likely getting like a cleanish tone. Even if your gain was all the way up, you got your humbucker equipped guitar, which at the time most likely was a Gibson. That's why everybody was saying, oh, Gibson sounds so fat. Because of course, if you come from a Tele, and then you plug a Les Paul and this is what you're getting. Of course you were gonna say, wow, that guitar
It's fat.
Of course, it's almost like twice the output. Of course it sounded fat with the same amp with the same settings. Let me know in the comment section below if you're an Amplitude user and this is feeling approachable enough for you. And while you're there, remember to like, subscribe, and do all those cool little things that we like to do on YouTube. And let's enjoy this little bossa nova right here. I hope your day keeps getting better and better, my friend. All right, let's go back. Okay, so I cannot stress enough on how important all that setup is, but I'm sure that you can't wait to hear what the benefits are, or some of the benefits are, of using this kind of method. So let's explore a few. Okay, the first one that I feel like at least was the first one that I like is because you can check different amps and actually know what the differences are without having like any weird surprises. Like for example, this is my clean amp, and when I'm using like a single coil guitar around midway in the input gain, this is what it sounds like. And even if I use a humbucker equipped guitar, even though you feel like it's a little bit hotter and there's a little bit more breakup, it's still a clean sound. So I can still say it's my clean amp. But what would happen if I were doing my input gain wrong and I were giving it too much power? Even though arguably it's still a great sound, I wouldn't consider that a clean amp anymore. That's more like an overdriven amp. And that's not what this is supposed to be in my case with the settings that I have. So that's how I know that there's something wrong. And even though you can see that I'm here on the gain like maybe at 5 or 6, you should not be getting that kind of gain from a clean amp when you're like around 6 in your gain. Unless it's like a really, really vintage amp. But let's say what happens if we were just to change amps. And let's say use like this JH Gold, which I love. It's very easy for me to determine what the differences are between the other tone and this one, right? Even though they're both clean and like on the verge of breakup, this is way hotter, of course, because it's bridge. Let's say what happens if we take the bridge off to make the comparison a little bit more equal. And then the same thing, if you were to hear this amp with these settings like that, and you were to think, oh, what would happen if we bridge it? And this is what you get right after. Of course, granted that you know what happens when you bridge a Marshall amp doing this kind of things, but that's kind of like what you would expect, right? A little bit more breakup, a little bit more warmth, and warmth is the key with this amp. I love this tone. It's like so rich and mid-heavy and bottom-heavy, and it's just amazing. This is from the Jimi Hendrix collection. That's why it sounds so good too. Really nice and fat. I love this amp. Okay, but let's say what happens if I were to choose something a little bit more high gain. Let's say like a dual rectifier. Even though I'm still on single coil pickup, you are getting a very high gain tone like a triple rectifier should be giving you, right? But I feel like if you're trying to get a high gain tone like that, you would not be using a single coil pickup guitar, right? You most likely would be using a humbucker equipped guitar, like this. It sounds like a high gain dual rectifier should sound, right? And just to drive this home even further, when you get something that is supposed to be like quirky and weird and like maybe not usual, this is what you should be expecting, right? That it is weird, quirky, and unusual like this. So you know what I mean? Like you were expecting something weird and quirky and different, not something normal and usual. And with this kind of settings in your input section, it's very easy to achieve that. Okay, but now that we heard these tones, let's go to the second benefit of using this kind of input settings, which is having the freedom of change guitars, experience the differences that they have, and get their different qualities of tone, while not ruining anything in your signal chain, and just enjoy the greatness. So let's just play this riff with a few guitars and hear what happens. you didn't figure it out by now, that was my funky tone.
But
What would happen if we used like a high gain tone, like a double rectifier? Crazy. So after all these sounds that we heard in Amplitude, I think it's safe to say that there's a big difference between every single guitar. No matter if you're doing clean or high gain, you hear a difference. And every time you change any piece of gear, you should be hearing a difference. So that's great. But also, there's another benefit to this method, that is that it is cross-platform. But what happens if we use neural DSP? Well, let's hear it. Let's see, same thing. If we're using like a single coil guitar, when your input is on 0, you should be like around half in that bar. Let's do it again. And if you go to humbucker in like a sort of path sound, almost 3/4, which is pretty much the same that it was in Amplitude, right? Of course, ballpark. But what did I say in the beginning of this video? This is about being approachable, not about being like exact and like, oh, it's minus 16 decibels, minus 18, minus 20. No, there's a margin of error. And in that margin of error is where you live, your creativity, your uniqueness,
your tone.
So let's see what happens if I play that same little like funky rhythm in this thing. Of course, not with all the guitars. Sort of what you would be expecting for a Corey Wone signature amplifier, right? And let's say what happens if we change the amp. Again, there's a difference, right? And in that difference is where the uniqueness of the amp lives. But what would happen if we needed like a super high gain tone? What would happen if we were to use this preset right here in the Archetype Gojira X? Just by looking at the name, I could think that it's going to be pretty high gain and it's going to sound distorted and it might have good body and stuff like that. So let's check it out. And that's exactly what we got, right? Let's see what would happen if we put a little bit more depth because we feel like it needs to be a little bit heavier. Very effectively, it's a great chugging sound. All right, so after hearing all these tones, why don't we go get a few conclusions, a little bit more of like philosophical thoughts. All right, let's move on. All right, so there you have it. If you were to be using this method that I just showed you today, and not think about it from like an engineering perspective or like something that is so unapproachable like numbers, minus 17, minus 18, where do I find these numbers? My interface doesn't say minus 18 or minus 16 or nothing like that, nor do my preamps. And you know that if you do have a big collection of preamps, none of them say the same thing. Some of them say my plus 6, plus 5, some of them say plus 75, plus 20. So what is it? That's why I thought that it's very easy for us to just check our input meters no matter what plugin you're using. Because right now I just checked Amplitude and Neural DSP, but that same principle holds true to every single amp that you're gonna be using in
the rest of your life.
What would that be? Never hit the red, unless maybe like occasional peaks, like pick one time in like this super riff, like you got really excited and all of a sudden, boom, there's an extra note that you did a little bit harder. That's okay. You won't have any issues with that. That is just, let's say, a little bit more character. Plus, nobody's gonna be grading you.
Oh, you clipped in this moment around here in minute 3.
No. So that's okay. Don't be too super conscious about it. Maybe if you were doing like a very important record, just lower your preamps a little bit more and you'll be solid. And let's say after you drop the volume a little bit more, you feel like you lost a little bit of the oomph that you had. My friend, just come right here to the input and turn it up a little bit more. But what's the benefit of that? That your preamps and your interface still worked at their optimum level, which is what the engineers behind the creation of this plugin were thinking you were gonna do every time you use their products. But you can still have all that character and all that gain that you were needing. And look, you have plus 24 dB. So it almost feels like it doesn't matter how low you go, but it matters how hot you are. Of course, there's always a sweet spot, and I feel that in my setup, with my gear, and the goals and the expectations that I have when I use an Ampsim, I feel like I pretty much get everything that I want, and it represents my own personality. Always on the edge of wrong, but still good. So I hope that helps you in the chase of your perfect tone, because of course, nothing that I'm saying, it's gonna mean anything if you don't go out there and try it for yourself. Trying to come up with your own voice and your own tone and your own sound is one of the most rewarding journeys. Not because it's cool to be just tweaking things and just finding it, but because when you start finding your tone and refining your ears while finding it, you can feel like you can actually use your instrument as a self-expression. Even if you don't have the best chops and you don't play like perfectly like Steve Vai, but you have the heart and the soul of Santana, you're gonna be solid. Plus, not everything is about being a virtuoso. There's nothing wrong with some nice sounding chords with some delicious delay and some nice overdrive, or having that super chunky, distorted tone to play your favorite Metallica riffs or your own songs, my friend. And if you like some of the super high gain distorted sounds that we have in this episode today, go check this episode right here where I'm checking the Neural DSP Gujira X. Man, what a great sounding distorted amp. So if you're playing metal or like doing like super blazing solos, that's your video, my friend. Go check it out. I'll wait for you right there. Right. Thank you so much.